Marcus Williams had always dreamed of owning a home in Sunset Valley, one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the city. After years of hard work as a real estate lawyer, he finally saved enough money to buy his dream house. The two-story colonial home had a perfect front lawn, white picket fence, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. When Marcus moved in 3 months ago, he was excited to start this new chapter of his life. He spent weekends painting the walls, planting flowers in the garden, and setting up his home office where he could work on his legal cases. The neighborhood seemed peaceful and quiet, exactly what he wanted after living in a busy apartment downtown for so many years. Marcus was a successful lawyer who specialized in real estate law. He had helped hundreds of families buy and sell their homes, and he knew all the rules and regulations about property ownership. His office downtown was always busy with clients who needed help with contracts, property disputes, and housing issues. He was respected in his field and had even won several important cases that made the local news. The first few weeks in his new home were wonderful. Marcus enjoyed his morning coffee on the front porch, watching the sun rise over the tree-lined street. His neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving hello when they saw him working in his yard. The mailman, Tom, always stopped to chat about the weather or the local baseball team. Everything felt perfect in his new community. However, Marcus began to notice that one neighbor across the street seemed different from the others. Linda Patterson was the president of the Homeowners Association, and she had lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years. She was a tall woman with short blonde hair who always wore expensive clothes and carried herself like she owned the entire street. Linda had a way of looking at people that made them feel uncomfortable, as if she was judging everything they did. At first, Marcus thought Linda was just being cautious about new residents. Many established neighborhoods had people who were protective of their community standards. He understood that homeowners associations existed to maintain property values and keep neighborhoods looking nice. As a real estate lawyer, he had dealt with many HOA situations and knew they could be helpful when managed properly. But Linda's behavior toward Marcus was different from how she treated other neighbors. When the elderly couple next door had their grandson visit for 2 weeks, Linda brought them homemade cookies and asked friendly questions about the young man's college plans. When the family down the street got a new car, she complimented them on their choice and asked about the financing options. Her interactions with other residents were warm and welcoming. With Marcus, Linda's approach was cold and suspicious. She would stand at her window and watch him when he worked in his yard. If he parked his car even slightly outside the designated lines, she would leave a note on his windshield about proper parking procedures. When he installed new solar panels to save energy, she sent him a certified letter questioning whether he had proper HOA approval. Even though he had followed all the correct procedures, Marcus tried to give Linda the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just very strict about rules and treated everyone the same way. He decided to introduce himself properly and try to build a good relationship with her. One Saturday morning, he walked across the street with a plate of cookies his sister had baked and knocked on Linda's door. Linda answered with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. She accepted the cookies but barely said thank you. When Marcus tried to make conversation about the neighborhood and mentioned that he was a lawyer, Linda's expression changed. She looked surprised and a little worried but quickly covered it up with another fake smile. The conversation was awkward and short, and Marcus left feeling like he had somehow made things worse instead of better. Over the next few weeks, Linda's behavior became even more strange. She started taking pictures of Marcus's house from different angles, always trying to be sneaky about it. She would walk her small dog past his property multiple times a day, stopping to stare at his front door, windows, and yard. Sometimes she would write things down in a small notebook, like she was documenting everything he did. Marcus began to feel uncomfortable in his own home. He had bought this house to find peace and happiness, but instead he felt like he was being watched all the time. He started closing his curtains during the day and avoiding spending time in his front yard. The joy he had felt about homeownership was slowly being replaced by stress and anxiety. When Marcus talked to other neighbors about Linda's behavior, they gave him mixed responses. Some said that Linda could be particular about certain things but was generally harmless. Others seemed nervous to say anything negative about her, since she was the HOA president and had significant power in the community. A few neighbors mentioned that Linda had been involved in disputes with other residents in the past, but they were vague about the details. Marcus realized that Linda Patterson was not just a strict neighbor or an overzealous HOA president. Her behavior toward him was targeted and personal in a way that felt wrong. As someone who had studied law for years and dealt with many different types of people, Marcus could sense that Linda had some kind of problem with him specifically. He just didn't know yet how far she would be willing to go to make his life difficult. The harassment from Linda Patterson escalated quickly after Marcus tried to be friendly with her. She began sending him official-looking letters almost every week, each one complaining about some minor issue with his property. The first letter claimed his grass was too long, even though Marcus had just mowed it 2 days earlier. The second letter said his garbage cans were placed incorrectly, despite him following the exact same pattern he had observed from other neighbors. Marcus kept every letter Linda sent him, filing them carefully in a folder in his home office. As a lawyer, he knew the importance of documentation, and something told him these papers might be important later. Each letter was signed with Linda's full title as HOA president and included threats about fines or other consequences if he didn't fix the supposed violations immediately. The letters became more creative and desperate as time went on. Linda complained that Marcus's doormat was the wrong color for the neighborhood aesthetic. She said his outdoor light fixture was too bright and disturbed other residents, even though it was the same style that came with most houses in the development. She even wrote a formal complaint about the way he arranged his recycling bins, claiming they created a visual disturbance for the community. What made Linda's behavior even more obvious was how she treated other residents who had similar or worse violations. The house 2 doors down had grass that was actually overgrown and weeds in the flower beds, but Linda never said a word to those homeowners. The family across the street left their garbage cans out for 3 days after pickup, but they never received any letters. It became clear to Marcus that Linda's complaints had nothing to do with maintaining neighborhood standards. Marcus decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting to address the situation directly. He had avoided these meetings before because his work schedule was busy, but he realized he needed to understand how the HOA operated and whether Linda was acting within her authority. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building at the entrance of the neighborhood. When Marcus walked into the meeting room, conversation stopped. About 12 other residents were sitting in folding chairs, and Linda was standing at the front with a clipboard and stack of papers. She looked shocked to see Marcus there, and her face turned red with embarrassment or anger. The other residents seemed curious about why Marcus had decided to attend. Linda tried to control the meeting and skip over any discussion of complaints or violations. She quickly went through topics like landscaping contracts and community event planning, speaking faster than usual, and avoiding eye contact with Marcus. When Marcus raised his hand to speak during the open comment period, Linda pretended not to see him at first. Finally, Marcus stood up and politely asked to address the multiple letters he had received about supposed violations. He explained that he had been trying to follow all HOA rules but was confused because other residents seemed to have similar issues that were not being addressed. Linda's face became even redder, and she stammered something about reviewing all properties equally. An older resident named Mrs. Chen spoke up and said she had never received any letters from the HOA, even though her property had some of the same features that Linda had complained about on Marcus's house. Another neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, mentioned that he had never heard of anyone getting so many violation notices in such a short time. The room became uncomfortable as people realized something unfair was happening. Linda tried to end the meeting quickly, but several residents started asking questions about how violations were reported and investigated. They wanted to know what the official process was supposed to be and whether there were checks and balances to prevent abuse of power. Linda became defensive and said that as president, she had the authority to enforce community standards as she saw fit. Marcus remained calm and professional throughout the meeting. He asked Linda to provide him with copies of the specific HOA rules that his property was supposedly violating. He also requested information about how other residents could report concerns about HOA management if they felt someone was being treated unfairly. Linda refused to answer these questions directly and said she would look into it. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Marcus privately. Mrs. Chen told him that Linda had made comments about certain types of people not belonging in their neighborhood. Mr. Rodriguez said he had noticed Linda watching Marcus's house obsessively and thought her behavior was strange. A younger couple mentioned that they had heard Linda complaining about property values and demographic changes in the area. These conversations helped Marcus understand that Linda's harassment was not random or based on legitimate HOA concerns. Her behavior was motivated by prejudice, and she was using her position as HOA president to try to make him feel unwelcome in his own home. Marcus realized he was dealing with someone who would abuse her power to push out residents she didn't want in the neighborhood. Over the next week, Linda's harassment actually increased after the HOA meeting. She seemed angry that Marcus had challenged her publicly and was determined to escalate the situation. She started taking more photos of his property and writing even more ridiculous violation letters. One letter complained that his newspaper was delivered to the wrong side of his driveway. Another said his car was parked at an improper angle. Marcus knew that Linda was hoping he would get frustrated and move away. Many people in his situation might have given up and looked for a home in a different neighborhood. But Marcus had worked too hard to buy his dream house, and he wasn't going to let a bully force him out. As a real estate lawyer, he also understood that Linda's behavior was likely illegal and could result in serious consequences for her. The situation was about to get much worse before it got better. Linda Patterson was planning something that would cross every line of legal and ethical behavior. She was about to make a mistake that would expose her true intentions and give Marcus all the evidence he needed to fight back. But Marcus had no idea just how far Linda was willing to go to try to destroy his life. Linda Patterson was getting desperate. Her constant letters and complaints hadn't driven Marcus Williams away from the neighborhood, and the HOA meeting had actually made other residents suspicious of her behavior. She needed a new strategy that would be more effective and harder for Marcus to fight. Late one evening, Linda came up with what she thought was a brilliant plan that would solve her problem once and for all. Linda had been taking photos of Marcus's house for weeks, and she had also been researching property records online. As HOA president, she had access to some neighborhood information, and she used this access to gather details about Marcus's home purchase, mortgage, and property value. Linda convinced herself that if she could create a serious problem for Marcus, he would have no choice but to sell his house and leave. Her plan was simple, but incredibly illegal. Linda decided to list Marcus's house for sale online without his knowledge or permission. She thought that if potential buyers started showing up at his door and calling him about purchasing his home, it would create so much chaos and confusion that Marcus would be forced to move. She also hoped that if word spread that his house was for sale, it might damage his reputation in the neighborhood. Linda spent several hours creating a fake real estate listing on multiple websites. She used the photos she had secretly taken of Marcus's house and wrote a description that made the property sound desperate to sell. She listed the price significantly below market value to attract as many interested buyers as possible. Linda used a fake email address and phone number that she created specifically for this scheme. In the listing description, Linda wrote that the homeowner was motivated to sell quickly due to financial difficulties and was open to all reasonable offers. She claimed that the house needed to be sold within 30 days because of personal circumstances and that interested buyers should drive by any time to view the property. Linda thought she was being clever by not using Marcus's real name in the listing. The fake listing went live on Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, Marcus started receiving strange phone calls. Real estate agents were calling to ask about showing the house to their clients. Potential buyers were asking about scheduling private tours and making offers sight unseen. Marcus was completely confused because he had never put his house on the market and had no intention of selling. At first, Marcus thought the calls were some kind of mistake or scam. He politely explained to each caller that his house was not for sale and that they must have the wrong property. But as more calls came in throughout the day, Marcus realized this was not a random error. Someone had deliberately listed his house online, and it was causing serious problems. The situation became even more chaotic when people started showing up at Marcus's front door. On Wednesday evening, a young couple knocked and asked if they could walk through the house because they were very interested in buying it. On Thursday morning, a real estate agent arrived with a client and seemed angry when Marcus told them the house wasn't actually for sale. By Thursday afternoon, Marcus had received over 20 phone calls and had multiple people come to his door. Marcus immediately suspected that Linda Patterson was behind this scheme. The timing was too convenient. coming just days after their confrontation at the HOA meeting. Linda was the only person who had been taking photos of his house, and she clearly wanted him to leave the neighborhood. As a real estate lawyer, Marcus knew that creating fake property listings was a serious crime that could result in felony charges. Marcus decided to investigate before confronting Linda directly. He searched online and quickly found his house listed on several real estate websites. The photos were definitely taken from the street, and some of them matched the angles he had seen Linda using when she was spying on his property. The listing details included information that only someone familiar with the neighborhood would know. The phone calls and door visits continued throughout Thursday and Friday. Marcus had to take time off work to deal with the constant interruptions. He couldn't concentrate on his legal cases because his phone was ringing every few minutes with people asking about his house. Some callers became angry when he explained that the listing was fake, and a few accused him of wasting their time. On Friday evening, Marcus called the websites where his house was listed and explained the situation. Most of the customer service representatives were helpful and agreed to remove the fake listings, but they warned him that new listings could be created quickly if someone was determined to continue the harassment. They suggested that Marcus file a police report because creating fake real estate listings was considered fraud. Marcus also contacted his homeowner's insurance company to report the situation. The insurance representative told him that this type of harassment could potentially affect his coverage if it led to property damage or other problems. She recommended that Marcus document everything carefully and consider hiring a security camera system to monitor his property. The stress of dealing with constant phone calls and unexpected visitors was taking a toll on Marcus's daily life. He had bought his house to find peace and stability, but instead he was living in chaos created by Linda's malicious behavior. Marcus realized that Linda had crossed a major legal line and that her actions could no longer be dismissed as simple HOA disputes. Over the weekend, Marcus prepared to take serious legal action. He printed copies of all the fake listings, saved screenshots of the websites, and made a detailed log of every phone call and visitor he had received. He also drove through the neighborhood and took photos showing that no other houses had for sale signs, which would help prove that his property was being specifically targeted. Marcus knew that Linda's fake listing scheme was probably a felony in his state. Creating fraudulent real estate advertisements with intent to cause financial harm could result in significant fines and even jail time. As a real estate lawyer, Marcus understood exactly which laws Linda had broken and what kind of evidence would be needed to prosecute her successfully. Linda Patterson had no idea that her brilliant plan was actually the biggest mistake she could have made. By creating fake real estate listings, she had provided Marcus with clear, documented proof of criminal behavior that no HOA president would ever have legitimate authority to do. Linda thought she was driving Marcus away, but instead she was about to face the full force of the legal system. Monday morning brought a new wave of chaos to Marcus Williams's life. More people were calling about the fake listing, and now some of them were getting aggressive when he explained that his house wasn't actually for sale. One caller accused him of being a scammer and threatened to report him to authorities. Another caller said he had driven 3 hours to see the house and demanded compensation for his wasted time and gas money. Marcus realized he needed to act fast before the situation got completely out of control. He called in sick to work and spent the morning gathering evidence and preparing for a legal battle. As a real estate lawyer, Marcus knew exactly what documentation would be needed to prove fraud and harassment. He also understood that Linda Patterson had probably committed multiple felonies without realizing how serious her crimes were. The first step was to file a police report. Marcus drove to the local police station with a thick folder of evidence, including printed copies of the fake listings, photos Linda had taken of his house, and logs of all the harassing phone calls and visitors. The desk sergeant initially seemed skeptical, but when Marcus explained that he was a lawyer and showed the extent of the evidence, the officer's attitude changed quickly. Detective Sarah Martinez was assigned to investigate the case. She had handled identity theft and fraud cases before, but she had never seen someone use fake real estate listings as a harassment tool. Detective Martinez was immediately interested in the case because the evidence was so clear and the crimes were so obvious. She told Marcus that creating fraudulent property listings was a serious felony that could result in years in Prison Detective Martinez began investigating by contacting the websites where Marcus's house had been listed. The customer service departments were cooperative and provided information about the accounts that had created the fake listings. All of the accounts were registered to fake names, but they all used the same email address and phone number. This pattern would make it easier to trace the listings back to Linda Patterson. While the police investigation was beginning, Marcus decided to take civil legal action as well. He contacted his law firm and spoke with a colleague who specialized in harassment and fraud cases. His colleague, Jennifer Adams, was shocked by the extent of Linda's behavior and agreed to help Marcus file a civil lawsuit seeking damages for harassment, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Jennifer Adams explained that Linda's actions had probably cost Marcus thousands of dollars in lost work time, stress, and disruption to his life. The fake listings had also potentially damaged Marcus's reputation and could have affected his credit score or property value if the situation had continued. Under state law, Marcus could sue Linda for both actual damages and punitive damages designed to punish her behavior. By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus and Jennifer had prepared a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Linda Patterson. The lawsuit included counts of fraud, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of privacy. They also included a request for a restraining order that would legally require Linda to stop all contact with Marcus and stay away from his property. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Marcus would have to appear in court and explain to a judge why he needed legal protection from his neighbor. Jennifer Adams warned him that Linda would probably try to defend herself by claiming she was just doing her job as HOA president. But the fake real estate listings would be impossible for her to explain away. Meanwhile, Detective Martinez was making progress with her investigation. The email address used to create the fake listings was traced to an account that Linda had set up using a fake name, but the account was linked to her real phone number and home address. The phone number in the listings was connected to a prepaid cell phone that Linda had purchased with cash, but security cameras at the store had recorded her making the purchase. On Wednesday evening, Detective Martinez and two other officers knocked on Linda Patterson's door. Linda answered with her usual fake smile, but her expression changed quickly when she saw the police badges. Detective Martinez explained that they were investigating fraud and harassment related to fake real estate listings, and Linda's face went completely white. Linda tried to deny any knowledge of the listings, but her story fell apart quickly under questioning. She claimed she didn't know anything about real estate websites, but Detective Martinez pointed out that Linda had been taking photos of Marcus's house for weeks. When confronted with evidence about the email accounts and phone numbers, Linda became defensive and started making excuses. The conversation took an ugly turn when Linda realized she was in serious legal trouble. She began making racist comments about Marcus and complained that certain people were ruining the neighborhood. Detective Martinez was shocked by Linda's blatant prejudice and realized that the harassment had been motivated by racism from the beginning. These statements would make Linda's crimes even more serious under hate crime laws. Detective Martinez arrested Linda Patterson on charges of fraud, harassment, and creating false documents. Linda was handcuffed and taken to jail while her neighbors watched from their windows and front yards. The sight of the HOA president being arrested created a sensation in the neighborhood, and word spread quickly through social media and local news outlets. The arrest was just the beginning of Linda's legal problems. When Detective Martinez searched Linda's house with a warrant, she found printed copies of all the fake listings, research about Marcus's property and personal information, and a notebook full of racist comments and plans to drive Marcus out of the neighborhood. This evidence would make it very difficult for Linda to claim that her actions were innocent mistakes. Local news stations picked up the story because it involved an HOA president being arrested for fraud and harassment. The story was particularly interesting because Linda had used real estate listings as a weapon, which was an unusual type of crime that most people had never heard of. The news coverage brought even more attention to Linda's racist motivations and abuse of her HOA position. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and vindication when he heard about Linda's arrest. For months he had been dealing with stress and harassment while trying to remain professional and give Linda the benefit of the doubt. Now it was clear that Linda's behavior had been criminal from the beginning, and she would finally face consequences for her actions. But the legal battle was far from over. Linda would probably hire a lawyer and try to minimize her crimes or claim that she was just enforcing HOA rules. Marcus knew that he would need to testify in criminal court and continue with his civil lawsuit to ensure that Linda faced appropriate punishment and could never harass him again. The fight for justice was just beginning. The news of Linda Patterson's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By Thursday morning, everyone in Sunset Valley knew that their HOA president had been arrested for creating fake real estate listings to harass Marcus Williams. The story became even more shocking when details emerged about Linda's racist motivations and her systematic campaign of harassment against Marcus. Linda was released on bail after spending one night in jail, but her reputation was completely destroyed. Neighbors who had previously respected her as HOA president were now horrified to learn about her criminal behavior. Many residents felt betrayed because they had trusted Linda to manage their community fairly, and instead she had been using her position to target someone because of his race. The local news coverage intensified when reporters interviewed other neighbors about Linda's behavior. Mrs. Chen told journalists that Linda had made racist comments about Marcus being the wrong type of person for their neighborhood. Mr. Rodriguez explained how Linda had obsessively watched Marcus's house and taken photos, while ignoring similar or worse violations by other residents. The pattern of discriminatory treatment became impossible to deny. Marcus's restraining order hearing proceeded as scheduled on Thursday morning, even though Linda had already been arrested. The judge was appalled by the evidence presented in court, including the fake real estate listings, the racist comments found in Linda's house, and the months of documented harassment. The judge immediately granted a permanent restraining order requiring Linda to stay at least 500 feet away from Marcus's property and have no contact with him whatsoever. Linda hired an expensive criminal defense attorney, Robert Sterling, who had a reputation for defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes. Sterling's strategy was to argue that Linda had made a mistake and that her actions were motivated by legitimate HOA concerns rather than racism. However, the evidence against Linda was overwhelming, and even Sterling seemed to realize that his client was in serious trouble. District Attorney's Office decided to prosecute Linda aggressively because her crimes involved both fraud and hate-motivated harassment. Prosecutor Maria Gonzalez explained to the media that Linda's case sent an important message about accountability for people who abuse positions of authority to target others based on race. The charges against Linda included multiple felonies that could result in several years in prison. Marcus's civil lawsuit moved forward parallel to the criminal case. Jennifer Adams, Marcus's lawyer, was able to use evidence from the criminal investigation to strengthen their civil claims. The racist comments found in Linda's house proved that her harassment was intentional and malicious, which would justify significant punitive damages beyond just compensating Marcus for his actual losses. The Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting to address the crisis caused by Linda's behavior. The other board members were embarrassed and angry that Linda had used her position to commit crimes that reflected badly on the entire community. They voted unanimously to remove Linda as president and ban her from holding any HOA position in the future. The board also issued a public apology to Marcus and promised to review all HOA policies to prevent future abuse. National news outlets picked up the story because it highlighted important issues about racism in housing and the abuse of HOA power. Civil rights organizations praised Marcus for fighting back against discrimination and standing up for his rights instead of being intimidated into moving away. Legal experts used Linda's case as an example of how harassment and fraud laws could be used to combat housing discrimination. Linda's behavior had consequences beyond just her own legal troubles. The HOA faced potential liability for Linda's actions because she had committed crimes while serving as their president. Several residents who had witnessed Linda's discriminatory behavior worried that they could be sued for failing to report or stop her harassment. Property values in the neighborhood temporarily declined because of negative publicity about racism and crime. Marcus received support from unexpected sources throughout the community. Real estate professionals reached out to commend him for exposing Linda's fraudulent listings, which they said could have damaged the integrity of online property databases. Civil rights lawyers offered to help with his case pro bono because they recognized the broader importance of holding HOA officials accountable for discriminatory harassment. The criminal trial was scheduled for early the following year, but Linda's lawyer began pushing for a plea deal as the evidence continued to mount against her. Detective Martinez had built an airtight case that included electronic evidence, witness testimony, and Linda's own incriminating statements and documents. Sterling advised Linda that going to trial would likely result in the maximum possible sentence. Linda's personal life fell apart as word of her arrest and racist behavior spread beyond the neighborhood. Her employer, a marketing company, fired her immediately when they learned about the criminal charges and media coverage. Friends and family members distanced themselves from Linda as they realized the extent of her prejudice and illegal behavior. She became a social outcast in her own community. Marcus finally felt like he could relax and enjoy his home for the first time since moving to Sunset Valley. The constant phone calls and unexpected visitors had stopped after the fake listings were removed. He no longer had to worry about Linda spying on his property or sending harassing letters. The legal system was working to ensure that Linda would face appropriate consequences for her crimes. However, Marcus knew that the legal process would take time to complete. The criminal trial could last several months, and his civil lawsuit might take even longer. Linda still lived in the neighborhood, and even though she was required to stay away from his property, Marcus remained cautious about his safety. He installed security cameras and made sure his doors were always locked. The broader community began to heal from the damage caused by Linda's behavior. New HOA leadership implemented policies to prevent discrimination and ensure that all residents were treated fairly regardless of their race or background. Neighbors who had previously been passive bystanders to Linda's harassment became more aware of their responsibility to speak up against injustice. Marcus's courage in fighting back against Linda had inspired other victims of HOA abuse to seek legal help. Lawyers across the country reported an increase in calls from homeowners who were facing similar harassment from HOA officials. Linda's case became a precedent that would help protect other residents from discriminatory treatment by neighborhood authorities. 6 months after Linda Patterson's arrest, the legal consequences of her actions reached their conclusion. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of years in prison if convicted at trial, Linda finally accepted a plea deal negotiated by her attorney. She pleaded guilty to fraud, harassment, and hate crime charges in exchange for a sentence that included 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and a requirement to pay significant financial damages to Marcus. The plea hearing was emotional and tense. Linda was required to admit in open court that she had created fake real estate listings to harass Marcus Williams and that her actions were motivated by racial prejudice. When the judge asked Linda to explain her behavior, she gave a half-hearted apology that focused more on her own embarrassment than on the harm she had caused to Marcus. Many observers felt that Linda still didn't fully understand the seriousness of her crimes. Marcus attended the plea hearing and was given the opportunity to read a victim impact statement. He spoke about the stress and anxiety Linda's harassment had caused him, the disruption to his work and personal life, and the violation of his right to feel safe in his own home. Marcus emphasized that Linda's actions had not just affected him personally but had also damaged the reputation of their entire neighborhood. The civil lawsuit was resolved more favorably for Marcus than anyone had expected. Jennifer Adams negotiated a settlement that required Linda to pay Marcus $200,000 in damages, covering his lost work time, legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages intended to punish Linda's behavior. Linda was also required to pay for Marcus's security system and ongoing therapy costs related to the harassment. Linda's financial situation became desperate as the legal bills and damages mounted up. She had already lost her job due to the criminal charges, and the settlement with Marcus consumed most of her savings and forced her to sell her house. The irony was not lost on anyone that Linda's attempt to drive Marcus out of the neighborhood had resulted in her own forced departure from Sunset Valley. The Homeowners Association implemented sweeping reforms to prevent future abuse of power. New policies required HOA board decisions to be made by majority vote, rather than unilateral action by the president. Residents were given clear procedures for reporting concerns about board member behavior, and regular audits would review all enforcement actions to ensure they were applied fairly to all residents regardless of race or other characteristics, Marcus became an advocate for HOA reform and fair housing rights. He wrote articles for legal journals about Linda's case and spoke at conferences about how harassment and fraud laws could be used to combat housing discrimination. His experience helped other lawyers develop strategies for representing clients who faced similar problems with abusive HOA officials. The neighborhood slowly recovered from the scandal, but Linda's behavior had lasting effects on the community. Property values took nearly a year to fully recover from the negative publicity. Several longtime residents moved away because they were embarrassed to be associated with a neighborhood that had made national news for racism. However, many new residents moved in specifically because they were impressed by how the community had handled the crisis and implemented reforms. Marcus's relationship with his neighbors improved dramatically after Linda's removal. Residents who had previously been afraid to challenge Linda's authority now felt comfortable expressing their opinions about community issues. The new HOA leadership was more transparent and collaborative, seeking input from all residents rather than making decisions behind closed doors. Linda served her prison sentence at a minimum security facility, where she was required to participate in programs about bias and prejudice. Prison officials reported that Linda remained defensive about her actions and showed little genuine remorse for the harm she had caused. Her probation officer would later struggle to monitor Linda's compliance with court orders because she continued to blame Marcus for her legal troubles. 2 years after the incident began, Marcus reflected on how the experience had changed his life. He had learned important lessons about standing up to bullies and using legal knowledge to protect his rights. The stress and anxiety of dealing with Linda's harassment had been terrible, but the eventual victory had given Marcus confidence that the legal system could work properly when victims were willing to fight back. Marcus decided to stay in his Sunset Valley home, which had truly become his dream house once Linda was no longer a threat. He enjoyed working in his garden, hosting barbecues for neighbors, and participating in community events with the reformed HOA. The house that Linda had tried to force him to sell became a symbol of Marcus's determination to claim his rightful place in the neighborhood. The case became a teaching tool in law schools across the country, where professors used Linda's prosecution to demonstrate how multiple areas of law could intersect in harassment cases. Students learned about real estate fraud, civil rights violations, and the importance of thorough documentation when building legal cases. Marcus occasionally guest lectured at these classes, sharing his perspective as both a victim and a lawyer. Linda Patterson's attempt to drive Marcus Williams out of Sunset Valley had completely backfired. Instead of forcing Marcus to leave, Linda's illegal behavior had resulted in her own criminal conviction, financial ruin, and social disgrace. Marcus had not only kept his dream home but had also helped reform HOA practices that would protect future residents from similar abuse. The story became a powerful reminder that justice could prevail when victims were willing to stand up for their rights and use every legal tool available to them. 5 years later, Marcus Williams had become a respected voice in the fight against housing discrimination. His law practice had grown significantly as word spread about his successful defense against Linda's harassment. Many clients sought him out specifically because they knew he understood what it felt like to be targeted by prejudiced neighbors or abusive HOA officials. Marcus established a nonprofit organization called Fair Housing Defense that provided free legal advice to homeowners facing discrimination. The organization helped dozens of families each year who were dealing with harassment, fraudulent complaints, or other attempts to force them out of their neighborhoods. Marcus's experience with Linda Patterson had taught him that many victims didn't know their legal rights or how to document harassment properly. Linda Patterson never fully recovered from her criminal conviction and civil judgment. After completing her prison sentence, she moved to a different state and struggled to find steady employment. Background checks consistently revealed her fraud and hate crime convictions, making it difficult for her to rent apartments or get jobs that required any level of trust or responsibility. The Sunset Valley neighborhood had transformed into a model community for inclusive HOA governance. The reforms implemented after Linda's removal attracted positive media attention and inquiries from other neighborhoods wanting to prevent similar problems. The community became more diverse and welcoming, with residents actively working to ensure that everyone felt included and respected. Marcus's story inspired legislation in several states that strengthened penalties for HOA officials who abused their authority. Lawmakers recognized that people like Linda could cause serious harm when they used their positions to target residents based on race, religion, or other protected characteristics. The new laws made it easier for victims to sue HOA boards and individual officials who engaged in discriminatory harassment. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had investigated Linda's crimes, often used the case as a training example for other officers. She emphasized how important it was to take harassment complaints seriously and to recognize when someone was being targeted because of their race or other characteristics. The case helped law enforcement understand that fraud and harassment could be tools of discrimination. Marcus never forgot the neighbors who had supported him during his fight with Linda. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez became close friends who regularly joined Marcus for community events and holiday celebrations. Their willingness to speak up about Linda's discriminatory behavior had been crucial to building the case against her and reforming the HOA. The fake real estate listing scheme that Linda had used became known in legal circles as the Patterson method, a term that described using fraudulent property advertisements to harass homeowners. Real estate websites improved their verification procedures to prevent similar fraud, and several states passed laws making it easier to prosecute people who created fake listings. Marcus's home, which Linda had tried so hard to force him to sell, became a gathering place for community events and civil rights meetings. The same house that had been illegally listed online without Marcus's permission was now regularly featured in local magazines as an example of beautiful neighborhood architecture and inclusive community values. On the 10th anniversary of his move to Sunset Valley, Marcus hosted a large block party to celebrate how far the neighborhood had come. Former residents who had moved away because of the Linda Patterson scandal returned to see the positive changes. New residents learned about the community's history and the importance of standing up against discrimination. Marcus never forgot the neighbors who had supported him during his fight with Linda. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez became close friends who regularly joined Marcus for community events and holiday celebrations. Their willingness to speak up about Linda's discriminatory behavior had been crucial to building the case against her and reforming the HOA. The fake real estate listing scheme that Linda had used became known in legal circles as the Patterson method, a term that described using fraudulent property advertisements to harass homeowners. Real estate websites improved their verification procedures to prevent similar fraud, and several states passed laws making it easier to prosecute people who created fake listings. Marcus's home, which Linda had tried so hard to force him to sell, became a gathering place for community events and civil rights meetings. The same house that had been illegally listed online without Marcus's permission was now regularly featured in local magazines as an example of beautiful neighborhood architecture and inclusive community values. On the 10th anniversary of his move to Sunset Valley, Marcus hosted a large block party to celebrate how far the neighborhood had come. Former residents who had moved away because of the Linda Patterson scandal returned to see the positive changes. New residents learned about the community's history and the importance of standing up against discrimination. Marcus often told people that fighting Linda Patterson had been one of the most difficult but important experiences of his life. He had learned that bullies often backed down when their victims fought back with knowledge, persistence, and legal strategy. His victory had not just protected his own rights, but had created safer communities for countless other families. The legacy of Marcus Williams versus Linda Patterson continued to influence housing law and community governance across the country. Their story proved that individual citizens could make a difference when they refused to accept discrimination and were willing to use every legal tool available to fight for justice. In the end, Linda's attempt to destroy Marcus's life had instead created positive change that would protect future generations of homeowners from similar abuse.